to ring the gong, which is also a responsibility. Here we go. All right. Well, hello, everyone. And as Cynthia said, welcome to the City Club conversation. City Club, of course, is an organization dedicated to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Wednesday, March 11th, and I am Marty Flax. I'm the president and CEO of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs. As you heard from Cynthia, we are a and we do that through our education programs, and public programs, including the one you heard about on March 31st. So please come find me if you'd like more information about that. We are at the Happy Dog in Gordon Square for the City Club's Happy Dog Takes on Everything series. And tonight we're talking about the situation in Iran. Just on the heels of the Venezuela operation that we were just talking about, the United States joined with Israel going on 2 weeks now on an attack on Iran last month. We've seen all kinds of responses. Congress is debating whether they can rein in or want to rein in this attempt. We've seen mixed opinion from public polling. And meanwhile, of course, Iran has responded with retaliatory attacks across the Middle East. And that conflict has disrupted air travel, gas prices, the global stock market, and of course continued to grow the instability in what was already a very unstable region. So tonight we're here to try and better understand this very fast-moving conflict, hour to hour, continued breaking news developments, how countries are responding, how the U.S. is responding, and what this means for us here in Cleveland in Northeast Ohio. So you already heard our brief introduction of our panelists, so I won't give their whole incredible bios, but please check them out on the website. Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, who is President Emerita and non-resident senior scholar at the Middle East Policy Council, among many other things. Avi Cover is a professor of law and director of the Institute for Global Security Law and Policy at Case Western Reserve University. And Madhusher Salehi is a member of the Cleveland Iranian community. He has worked and lived in the U.S. for over 40 years. Thanks for being here. Just a quick reminder for our live stream audience, if you have a question, you get to participate too. You can text your question to 330-541-5794, and the City Club team will try and work it into the program. So, members and friends of City Club, welcome to Happy Dog Takes on Everything, and let's dive in. Ambassador, I want to start with you, and I want to talk about and get your perspective on how we got to this moment, because of course the Iranian regime has been a problem for U.S. administrations, regional governments, Israel for many decades, and many U.S. administrations have had to tackle how do we deal with the Iran problem. What do you think led up to the decision and made the decision for this administration that this was the time to take this widespread military action?
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. It is a surprise and not a surprise that we did decide to bomb again in the midst of negotiations. So as Marty pointed out, Iran has been a challenge for multiple administrations. This one, in spite of the president saying that he did not want to get the United States into Middle Eastern wars or long wars, he did see how well the Israeli government handled not only Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but also Hezbollah, to a lesser extent the Houthis, Iran, and of course we joined in bombing Iran in June, and it was deemed successful. Now the president said everything was obliterated in June, but the reality was, and we kept hearing in the press that the nuclear missile sites had not been obliterated, although they had been collapsed. Negotiations began again. We knew 2 days before this war started that things were not going well. And that was the readout that we were getting from the interlocutor, the Omani foreign minister, as well as the Iranians and the United States. And so for several days, there were rather positive readouts coming from all sides. But on the last day, the Iranians said it was going well, the foreign minister said it was going well, and the United States negotiators were quiet. They did not comment. That was a very clear signal that the negotiations were going to be over, as I said to the BBC at the time. So the president does believe that he can be successful in eliminating the nuclear threat from Iran, but the questions are very out there. Why now? The Iranian nuclear arsenal is not yet complete, nor could it reach the United States. The missiles that Iran had could not reach the United States. The support for proxies have caused U.S. past, but it is more of an issue for our very close ally, Israel. And while the United States goals started with the missile program, we did increasingly take on the Israeli position, which was all three needed to be addressed. And the Iranians were absolutely steadfast in saying they would not talk about the rest. They would not talk about proxies. They wouldn't talk about ballistic missiles. So that's how we got to the beginning of the war. And then, of course, it has morphed several times, and we've heard several different reasons for getting into the war and what our goals might be, which is why so many people, not only in this country, but around the world, are very confused about what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I'll stop there.
We will surely come back to those goals of the war. But Avi, I want to turn to you because there's been over the last 2 weeks a lot of comparisons to past U.S. presidential action in terms of some good analogies, some bad ones probably from your perspective, including what we just saw in Venezuela 2 months ago. Give us a little context from your perspective around what is similar and different about this than other U.S. presidents taking action without congressional authorization. And maybe as you do that, remind us what is the framework we're operating under for U.S. law and international law?
Yeah. Hosting this event. Thank you to the City Club. Thank you all for being here. We have certainly one understanding of the law, of course, when it comes to armed conflict in the United States is Congress should declare war, but as probably many of you are aware, that's a fairly infrequent occurrence. And so what has become the seeming norm is that the president can unilaterally engage an armed force, and we've seen this well north of 100 times in the history of America. The difference, and I'll say it's the legal theory, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but behind this type of argument is that in general, what's usually thought is the only time the president can do so is if in fact the country is attacked. But over time, a norm has evolved that the executive branch has favored, not so surprisingly, which is that when conflict is both in the national interest, conflict does not rise in terms of nature, scope, and duration to the level of a constitutional war, the president has acted. And so we have seen this, as I suggested, scores of times. One of the notable that you can think of with under President Obama would be Libya, where acting in concert with allies, the United States engaged there. Was a legal rationale that the United States was not engaged in hostilities because, and this term might sound familiar to you, there were not going to be boots on the ground. It was largely an air war. Conflict did not go particularly well, I think, by many definitions. And so we've seen that. And indeed, this was the argument that supported the June bombing. But by some accounts, that was a war of minutes. I don't think it was lawful then, but here we're talking about something that is on the scale of, I think, by any definition, a full-fledged armed conflict, a war. And so I think it exceeds that quite malleable, flexible framework, which again goes to nature, scope. And I think what's terribly lost there is, first and foremost, is the deliberative process that is supposed to be a hallmark of the U.S. legal system. There should be a debate. There should be congressional authorization if indeed that is the sentiment of the legislature of the country. And we've seen plenty of conflicts where Congress has authorized conflicts, not necessarily to particularly positive effect. And I think we're seeing where we hear different rationales, not just by the day, but seemingly by the hour for this conflict, different explanations for what is the planning. And that kind of malleability, that kind of manipulation, that kind of deception, in theory, as part of our US legal system, should, if not, at least cabined. And I think we've just seen a stop there, we can
Sure.
get into more.
Yeah, so we've talked about this from the US foreign policy side of things, motivating the US government and our legal system, but talk about it a little bit from the perspective of Iranians on the ground. First of all, I would love to hear hearing from people on the ground in terms of what they're experiencing and what's happening on the ground in Iran, but also without asking you to speak for every Iranian, what is your sense of how Iranians feel about this campaign at this point?
Again, thank you very much for giving us a seat here so we can articulate the view of the people of Iran. The government that has taken over Iran has been, nobody got hurt more than the people of Iran from this government. Over the past 47 years, the people of Iran have risen to get rid of this government, and they have been unsuccessful. One of the programs that this government or this Islamic Republic had was to completely reduce the Iranian woman to be a chattel in the house and have that quote-unquote Islamic rule of a woman in the house. Whatever they did, trying to start them in the schools and middle schools and universities, did not work. The last time they put an army of the enforcers and told the Iranian woman, if the piece of your hair is out, you are a prostitute, you are this, you are that, and we are going to crush the streets. That started the rising of the Iranian woman. And about 3 years ago, they rose up and started this movement. Sadly to say, we men were coward enough and not to join them at the beginning, but when we saw their lead, we joined them. 3 years ago, a woman who was just walking on the street and had a piece of her hair out was arrested, was beaten so badly that she died in the hospital that night. Her name was Mahsa, and it started the Mahsa revolution in Iran. Whatever the government did to crush that, they were unsuccessful. The economic situation in Iran got much more dire to the point that people can't even afford buying this basic staples. About January of this year, starting in December, there were major demonstrations of Iranian people coming in all of the Iranian cities out and saying, death to this government, we don't want it, we want something else. Sometimes in early January, there was a communication from the United States that you guys come onto the streets and we are going to support you. Millions of Iranians took to the streets, and according to the Islamic Republic's own admission, on 400 different cities, they machine gunned the demonstrators. The number of people who got called in, died in that one, is disputed all over. The American president about a couple of weeks ago said that according to the United States number, over 32,000 people got murdered on their streets during that 2 nights. It happened in 2 nights. And then the voice came, told us to come out. We came out and you said that you're going to support us. Where were you? The Americans started sending the ships and the aircraft carriers and all of that. And it is my personal view, and I believe it is shared by a lot of Iranians, that the reason this thing started when it started and was that those ships had to get into the and started. The Iranian people are going to crash this Islamic Republic, whatever it's going to take. United States have been probably the best way to say it outside of the United States and the discussions inside the United States and the debates on this subject, the only and the last shining city on the hill that everybody has looked for up to. You guys did it in World War II. You saved Europe from Europeans. You guys brought down the Berlin Wall and freed 400-500 million people from the yoke of communism. That was the most stupid economic idea ever. Mao, the Chinese leader, did one great thing in 1976, and that led United States basically helping China to go from a peasant, 600-700 million people, to what they are now. And then you guys have supported and protected Israel over all these years against the terrorist attacks that are being attacked on them daily. The biggest sponsor of terrorism in this era was Islamic Republic. Hundreds of billions of dollars of Iranian money was taken from Iran, and it was spent in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Gaza for a bunch of, lowlifes that were just paid by Iranian government and created that situation. And now here we are a people that are going to crush this Islamic Republic. We needed military support because of what happened on January 7 and January 8. We need somebody to come in and stand to these machine guns on the streets. While I'm from Tehran, I was born and raised in Tehran before I came here, it is gut-wrenching to see some of those buildings get bombed. But this is the price that the people of Iran are willing to pay, want to pay, and looking forward to the United States to help them get rid of this Islamic Republic.
Thank you so much for that perspective. So important to hear. So Monishar is exposing something that has been really challenging, and Ambassador, you alluded to this too, which is all of the many different explanations for why we are at war right now. The administration, I think it's fair to say, generously has not been very objectives are going into this war, but we also have a lot of actors in this. We have the interests of the United States. We have the interests of Israel, who is our partner in this military operation. We also have the interests of all of the states around Iran who are facing the barrage of attack from Iran in response. Each of them have a view on this as well. Ambassador, I'm going to ask you to unpack a little bit what you see as the impact and the interests of all of those other countries in the region as we're undertaking this operation and what that might mean for where this conflict goes.
Indeed, yeah. Well, at this point, there are over 20 countries involved in this war. I don't know if the administration anticipated that when they began, where we are now. Our partners in the Gulf, so we certainly had hardliners in the United States and the government of Israel pushing hard for us to get involved in this war. It absolutely serves Israel's interests, without a doubt. Our allies in the Gulf, Arab states, were pushing hard for us not to begin this war. They absolutely understood, even before their countries were being bombed, that they would take the brunt of the Iranian response. Iran was very clear about that before we attacked, that they would try and reach US bases in the region, which are in Kuwait and the UAE and Bahrain and Saudi. And of course, that those who support this war, and to an extent, the UAE in particular has been a strong partner for Israel and the United States, that they would take the brunt. So we were hearing from the other side, let diplomacy play out. As I mentioned earlier, the Omani foreign minister, who was a mediator, said he thought a deal could be done. The Iranians had put a number of proposals on the table, including opening up Iran to US economic investment, which is often highly effective. People like our know-how, our money, et cetera. And of course, we do have a long history with Iran before 1979. I don't know, many Americans forget our relationship didn't start in 1979, that we were involved in a coup in Iran, a government, not with the expectation that Islamicists would get to the top, but we certainly were involved in that wrought some unwelcome changes in Iran. So we have the Gulf states, we have other Arab states who were not enthusiastic about us attacking Iran, but certainly felt that if we did it, we better do it right. we better succeed. We said we were going there, originally for the nuclear program, then later on for regime change. And you've all heard the president in the last week no longer talking about regime change, which means where are we leaving the Iranian people? How can they trust us if we keep changing why we are there? And at this point, with the president saying it's going to end soon, an elegant exit, and I can't remember the other quotes I had in my head earlier today, the expectation is that there will be a compromise. And people keep talking about the Venezuela option. If they put somebody in that would be more amenable to US demands, then the regime, in fact, could stay in place, which again makes us have to ask the question, especially as we had called for Iranians to come out and revolt, and yet the first time around, we were not there, as my colleague points out. And this time around, we certainly didn't put anything in place that made a clear case for coming out. How do military or police surrender, as we called on them to do? Surrender to whom? How would the Iranian people rise up when we are dropping bombs on their heads? Now, recently we've said, stay in. And I'll stop.
There's so much to unpack. Questions to get to. I want to get to a few more before we get to our Q&A though. So Avi, I'm going to come back to you because we don't know, as the ambassador just said, is this a conflict that is on the verge of wrapping up, or is this a conflict that is still ramping up? We just don't know. What would you like to see happen domestically or internationally for that matter? We can talk about international law as well. And does it matter whether this conflict is almost over or not from your perspective in terms of what you think needs to happen to make this a legitimate engagement?
Well, I guess what I would first say is I think what is so scary is that, in my view, the president is not a serious man with the most serious and awesome responsibility. And the idea, the president is commander-in-chief and has this awesome responsibility. And I think he has taken us into a war that has not been thought through. And that has not been vetted with the American public. And Manusha spoke so, I think, movingly about the plight of so many Iranians. But I'd underscore what the ambassador said about whether one can trust the president and that commitment that is required for the people. I think, I don't know, one of the phrases you might have referred to, he the other day referred to this is an excursion. Might as well characterize it as a frolic and detour. And that, the people who perhaps they would have been leaders, they've killed, which suggests certainly an accommodationist approach and perhaps not a full-fledged regime. To your core point question, Marty, I think Congress needs to do its job. There needs to be rigorous debate and discussion and oversight, however limited that might seem. And I think it's about these sorts of forums. I think it's about people speaking up loudly, expressing their distrust, their discomfort, their displeasure, their dissent, and keeping this president, this administration accountable. That may seem like small token measures, but we now know the United States was responsible for 175 children and teachers being killed. It's a horror of war that occurred, and it certainly sounds like, I don't want to prejudge, early reports are out, but they didn't do their work, right? They didn't realize, they didn't know that this site had changed and was no longer a military facility, but had been changed to a school. That's one illustration, that reflects the tragedy of war, the awesomeness of war, but how errantly this government is waging this war.
Thanks, Manusha, coming back to you and thinking through the scenarios that the two previous speakers just laid out in terms of the uncertainty around the U.S. commitment, if you will, to continuing this, or even what the objectives might be. Put yourself in the scenario of this remains an air war, or this remains a time-limited operation. Where does that leave people of Iran, what do you expect to see next after this ends? And to foreshadow you can answer the next question. I'm going to ask everyone in a rapid round before we go to Q&A, which is, what are things that people here in Cleveland and Northeastern Ohio could be doing to support the people of Iran, either now or in that future time?
Let me just add something. The biggest oxymoron in political vocabulary is negotiating with the Islamic Republic and believing of what they say during this. That is a fact. The government, this Islamic Republic government has to go. The bombings, unfortunately, there was a bomb that went astray and hit a school that was next to the IRGCs, one of the centers of our IRGCs. Yesterday and today, the target of bombing changed in Iran from hitting the infrastructure of this Islamic Republic to actually going after those motorbikers that are IRGC plainclothes people and killing people in Iran. We have videos of at least 9 of them that were hit. And given the of the internet in Iran, we are having difficulty getting them, but it has changed. The people of Iran has risen. Iran has a very long history, but what it has and the people of Iran have is a longer memory. We are going to remember at that in our dire hour, it most needing hour, there was a hand that came in and helped us to break this government and finally to get what we wanted to get. And that was the hand of the United States. I understand the debate, internal debate within the policy, the incompleteness of the plan and all of that. But what it is going to do is going to give us the military protection to beat this government out and rejoin the community of the civilized people.
Thank you. So we're going to turn to our audience Q&A in just a moment, so you can think about your questions and get ready to come up here. I just want to ask a really rapid fire round, 1 minute from each of you, about why this issue should matter to people in Cleveland. And if you want to add to that anything you think Clevelanders should be doing to engage either in support of the people of Iran or engaging in the situation in general in terms of U.S. policy, that would be welcome. So Manishwar, I'm going to start with you and we'll work our way this way.
The quick answer is that because you guys are United States of America. Secondly, Iran would be one of the biggest markets that would be opened up to the world after this government is thrown out. If you guys think that the Marshall Plan in Europe was large, wait until to see when the market in Iran opens up. We are the second largest reservoir of natural gas, and we need it. We need anything that the last 30 years, Iran has been reduced to a 300 years ago's economy. We need everything. Cleveland is an industrial base, and we can use quite a number of what is available in Cleveland to go back and rebuild the country back up. It would be the largest Marshall Plan since the World War II.
I guess just building off that, if I believe for a moment that this government and frankly the American public were behind supporting a Marshall Plan to support Iranians, I might have a different view of things. I'm afraid I just harbor all too much cynicism and skepticism about, and this isn't specific to this administration. This is to pretty much any U.S. foreign entanglement, no matter the purported aims, that it's probably been since the Marshall Plan where we've seen an effective engagement and intrusion. So I hope, and share your idealism in some respects, but I'm all too skeptical. So I just would adjure all of us to be speaking up, reaching out to our leaders and ensuring that debate and discussion continues.
I'd say big picture, it's important to be a trustworthy negotiator, as you say. And right now, our nation is one that has the reputation of negotiating and bombing while negotiations are ongoing. That is not a good reputation to have. Closer to home, of course, is the cost of the war. I've seen my gas prices go up, and this war is costing between 800 million and $1 billion per day. Per day. Keeping in mind, after we funded the destruction of the Gaza Strip, we funded that. We are now going to be asked to fund part of the reconstruction on it. So we paid to destroy it, and we're going to have to pay to rebuild it. The president said he was going to be looking, I think, offering, and I think he said 20 billion. Somebody correct me if that's the wrong figure, but a substantial amount of taxpayer money. This war, if it ends as well as it possibly could, with regime change and a handout to the Iranian people, we will be paying for that too.
May I just interject something in here?
Real quick, we do
Iran has over $120 billion in frozen assets outside of Iran. The people of Iran are not looking for you to pay for it. We have every means to pay for it immediately and today. All we need to do is get rid of the Islamic Republic.
Thank you so much. So we are about to begin our audience Q&A, and I'm sure we're going to get some great tough questions for our expert panelists. For the live stream audience or anyone who's just joining us, I'm Marty Flax. I'm the president and CEO of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs and moderator for today's conversation. We are at the Happy Dog in Gordon Square, taking on the situation in Iran with Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Stanley, Avi Cover, and Manoucher Salehi. If you are here with us, do as these folks have already done and line up next to the microphone on my left to ask a question. If you are joining us virtually, or if you prefer to text your question from in the room, that's perfectly fine. You can text it to 330-541-5794, and we'll try to work those into the program. With the goal that sensitive or private information stay that way, there is a reminder here that this forum is being live streamed and will be made publicly available in the City Club archives. So bear that in mind when you speak. And also, please, we ask you kindly to keep your questions short, to the point, and make them actually a question so that we can get to as many of you as possible. So with that, we're going to go to our first question.
Illegal moving to war without congressional approval. Can you speak to the law? That was the other part of the question, and we would appreciate your expertise. What international laws is the U.S. violating?
Yeah, sure. I mean, simply put, there are two ways in which a state can violate the territorial integrity of another state. One is through a UN Security Council authorization. Needless to say, I don't think that was ever going to be forthcoming. That would require all members, which would have included both China and Russia, abstaining from a veto at a minimum. And the other, though, is if indeed a state is attacked or is facing an imminent attack. And so that's the critical piece that I suppose to some extent the administration, though I don't think in particularly robust way, has sort of gestured to that the nuclear weapons pose some sort of imminent threat, or the ballistic missiles or the proxies did. Although, again, that standard of imminence seems quite attenuated, I guess I would say, somewhat generously. And this gets to, though, I mean, of course, the arguments about Iran having a nuclear bomb, how far they are from it. It goes to some of those negotiations, the United States effectively saying the only position was to have zero enriched uranium. And so, I think it's a pretty easy call as a legal matter internationally that this is a violation of international law.
Thanks, Avi. Next question.
Happy to be here. I'm assuming the IRGC have agents in this country on our soil, and they're trained and dedicated. Why have we not heard of an action, aka the World Trade Center? Why have we not heard of a bioterrorism or a dirty bomb or such? Or is that still coming?
scary question. Who wants to take on that?
I'll take a stab at it. Insofar as protecting the homeland, the United States government across agencies has worked very hard to do so. There have been threats, there have been attempts over many years. There was one on, I think it was Connecticut's water system, but someplace in New England that was attributed to Iranian agents. It is not to say that people might not be out there trying, but so far, touching wood, the efforts to protect the homeland have been successful. Keeping in mind, of course, they only have to be right once. We have to be right every time in our efforts.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next question.
Yeah, well, thank you for tonight, but it's everybody's dying to find out more information, so I appreciate your views. But it seemed to surface in the news in the past week or so is that, and it's unverified, obviously, but that Israel and Christian nationalists are pushing this, trying to get us into like the end times, Armageddon, end of the world kind of thing, and that this is supposedly, I guess, some of the commanders of our troops were promoting it as an end of the world kind of thing, and second coming of Christ, whatever you want to call it. But I wonder if anybody had any views on that, or if anybody heard anything about that.
Anybody heard any of those theories?
In the Islamic Republic idea, there is this 12th Imam that is supposedly going to show up right around this time that it is. So many of the supporters of the Islamic Republic lately has
Thank you.
suggested in Iran that the guy is going to show up. But the Iranian women and the Iranian people have created our Iron Dome that we are not going to allow him to come in, at least into Iran. He can go to hell wherever he wants to go to, but he's not going to be coming into Iran. We're not going to let him in.
Thank you. Ambassador, maybe you want to say a little bit about Israeli policy and interests in this conflict.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, this is very much, and they're very open about it, and the Prime Minister has been trying to convince successive American presidents to attack Iran. This is nothing from Israel's point of view. I will say that under the deal that President Obama got, although it did not satisfy everyone, that the United States Intelligence Service, the IAEA, and even Israeli intelligence said that Iran abided by that deal. Iran abided by that deal. So this Prime Minister got this president to join. In my conversations with Israelis in the last week or so, they are very, very happy. This is going well from their perspective. They believe the president is all in. They are not worried about him exiting early, the government of Israel. And so from their perspective, while regime change is something that they have spoken about, that they would welcome Iran, like the rest of us, rejoining the community of nations, there are also those in the administration in Israel who will be quite okay with Iran descending into civil war and chaos. So the interest of the United States and Israel, and there's more conversation in the last several days, likely are going to diverge at some point near future. You read, I'm sure, that when Israel started hitting Iranian infrastructure, the United States was not pleased about that because that has to be rebuilt. It makes it harder for any government that comes in to rule successfully and safely. So keep an eye about the interest as well.
Allow me for a second to, because under the agreement, Iranian and Islam was supposed to enrich uranium to 3 to 5%. They were caught enriching it to 60%. And they have something like 400 kilograms of it. They were caught on it. And it's about 1,000 pounds. I'm not sure how many atomic bombs can be built by that one. So this is going back to that oxymoron concept of you're negotiating with these guys, they're lying to you, they're buying time, and they're doing whatever they want.
And we're not going to get into an argument, but I would point out that the further enrichment beyond what was agreed in the deal began after President Trump pulled us out of the deal. And I'll stop with that.
This is what we're here
But
for.
the
Is that
Europe-
we're gonna
But
leave it
the
there,
Europe
but
was
let's-
in it, the Europe was in it, and they went back to the Europeans and said, we are going to stick with the agreement.
Yeah, well, this is what we're here for. It's a good, robust debate, so I appreciate both of you on this. Let's go to our next question.
Thank you very much for everyone for the great conversation. I have a question for manager, which is kind of follow up on. And so, as Iranians in diaspora, and also Americans, we are aware that this time the main slogan of people on the streets is Javid Shah, and they are supporting the Crown Prince in exile as a leader for transition during the time of transition. And one of their main pointers about is that we as Iranian people, as not looking for charity, but we want the world to help us to succeed in our revolution and liberating our country. So my question for you is mostly around how do you think that Iranian in diaspora and also Americans can convey that message? And also on top of that, on top of what you mentioned recently, regarding the prevention of chaos happening or prevention of like civil war or problematic situations. I think a lot of Iranians believe that's because we have this leadership this time and we're plan and we are together and we have connections. It's not going to be a chaotic situation. So I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that and how do you think we can convey that and do you believe that's actually a correct situation? Thank you.
Thank you.
There is going to be a transition when the Islamic Republic collapses. There is going to be a good time for us, the people of Iran, determine what kind of a government we want, what should be our constitution, and how do we elect those people to run it. At this stage outside of the Iran, there have been an umbrella created by the former Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, to be the transition government during this time. Certainly, the majority of the Iranian people outside of Iran have voted or have elected him to be the transition government based on the three promises that he has made, that is going to be to the people of Iran deciding what it is. He has indicated that he doesn't want to be the Shah, he doesn't want to be the president, but he's going to be only as a transition. In that capacity, certainly I agree with him. There are policies that he may not agree. But one of the things that I urge everybody to realize is that we are the most educated, even more educated than Israelis, people in the Middle East. We are not going to start tear each other up for what happened in Syria or what happened in Libya at the most. We are yearning for that. We have been fighting for that for 40 years, and we are not going to blow that opportunity. It's going to be a very peaceful transition government in Iran when it happens.
Thank you. Next question. Oh,
Hello, my name is Simin. I'm in this country for 40 years. Left Iran because I couldn't go to university. Because of my family, not really agreeing with the government. And so I had to leave the country. I'm a physician here. I have some comments and also
let's just do questions. You can do comments afterwards with the panel.
So I want to thank you guys and thank you all the Americans that have stand up with Iranian people. Why not then, different government of U.S. Throw the IRGC sons and daughters that live in America and Canada and Europe freely with the money of Iranian. Here they don't have to cover. They live in palaces But Iranian people have to struggle for basic needs. So why do we close their embassies in, they have an interest section in Washington. We need to, and when people, 40,000 people get killed on the street, what are our responsibility as a nation and democratic nation? We stay quiet? That's really unacceptable to me.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. And does anyone want to talk about policy response has been or should be kind of gross human rights abuses overseas, maybe in other places? Is there any thought you want to share on that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is, I think this is the flip side of what's particularly unsatisfying about, I will acknowledge, about international law and international human rights law, that the territorial sovereignty effectively trumps even human rights violations within the borders of another state. And so this is that, really unsatisfying response, I'm going to acknowledge, that in the face of a tragedy going on in Iran today and in many other countries, states have to act without there being UN Security Council authorization, in part for the reason that states often, of course, will on pretexts, use such tragedies. It's not a satisfying response, and certainly we've seen, obviously, genocides that have occurred, even in current times, where countries haven't acted. So that's truly, the genuine question. And so, that's a debate also for the American people, right? And if that really is going to be a reason to intervene, you want the American public to support that, as opposed to an administration unilaterally determining that.
Thank you. Next question.
Thanks. I understand that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is also, or primarily, the business. And I'm wondering if at some point you can negotiate with them. And if you can't, what are you going to do about it?
Interesting question, and it goes to maybe I'll broaden it out slightly to say, from your perspective, Monisha, I'll start there, but then others in other contexts, what does regime change look like from your perspective? And I'll put it in the context of when we went to war in Iraq to take out Saddam Hussein, we did what was debassification, right? We kicked out tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people from all of the institutions, and I think we came to regret that move pretty significantly. What is the better way for a transition to look like in Iran? So maybe I'll start with.
To directly respond to you, why are you so naive that you think that you would negotiate with IRGC and they would stick to it? Okay, this is
why am I so naive?
No, what are we naive? My apologies. Why are we so naive knowing IRGC? Why do you think you negotiate with them and they're going to stick to it?
If they're a business, money talks.
So our audience online is not going to be able to hear you, so we're not going to be able to do much of a back and forth. Sorry.
But the thing about it is that we were a very civilized people. We are still very civilized people that have been occupied by a tyranny, one of the worst ones that we have had in the recent memory of human beings. There is going to be a transition. It is going to be a difficult one. It is going to be a challenging one. Probably the first 2, 3, 4 governments of Iran are going to be short-lived because we need to relearn how to govern ourselves, how to manage ourselves. Probably a good example of it would be Spain after the dictator fell apart, and within something like 10 years, they had something like 15 governments. We, the people of Iran, need to learn how to govern ourselves, how to join the international civilized societies, and it is going to be a very painful, long process, but we need to start it.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on this?
Yeah.
No? Okay. Move
move sneak a text question here from our. It's a quite pointed question. It says, can we or should we expect conflict on American soil?
Well, we got a bit of an answer of that from the ambassador in terms of.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that ongoing efforts to protect the homeland are very serious and well developed, and the government, every U.S. government will do their best to protect the homeland.
First, thank you for everybody, and you guys are well respected. Thank you so much. My question is, what do you think the reason behind America left when Gaza situation happened, a war that actually Hamas started, and then many people got killed? That was a tragedy. It was a bad tragedy, and over 2 years, 70,000 people died, and America left was in the street every single day in every major city. Then 50,000 Iranian people died in a matter of 2 days. Not even one demonstration from America left asking for their tragedy or helping them or even say we sympathize with them. Why do you think is that?
Well, I think many Americans, and I will ask my colleagues to speak as well, were dismayed because we asked them to come into the street and we did not help. And so that burden of bearing some responsibility of the hopefulness that Iranians had rests on the US government.
Thank you.
For me, this is the nature of Palestinians. They only think about themselves. The Iranians came in and supported them, and while our people got killed on over 2 nights, this wasn't over years or something, over 2 nights, 40,000 Iranians were machine gunned by their governments there. But this is the very nature of the Palestinians, and I apologize if anybody gets offended. That's why they are where they are. When Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait and conquered Kuwait, the Kuwaitis for years and years and years were supporting the Palestinian cause. The first person who went and saw Saddam Hussein was Yasser Arafat. And the first thing that he asked from Saddam Hussein was, what portion of Kuwait is mine? And for that, Kuwaitis, who are the Arabs, through Palestinians, something like 90,000 of Palestinians out of Kuwait, and passed a law that no Palestinians is allowed to get a visa to go see Kuwait.
Well, can I just, I guess, with respect to that, I think the question was not so much Palestinians and their protesting, right, but about the left. And I think it's a terrific question. And I mean, in part, a sobering response is shame on us, shame on the left, that innocent Iranians, brave protesters, should be celebrated and should be supported, and should be supported on campuses and on the streets. And I think to some extent, the minister is speaking to that. That part I think is important, and I stand with. I don't have a great insight as to the why. I think there should be.
Can I do? Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you for that. And yeah, it's unfortunately trying to compare tragedies, and it's tough. There's a lot of really awful things going on in the world, and we need to see more engagement on all of them. I want to close out with a quick question to each of you, just on that same theme of zooming out a little bit from Iran specifically, and thinking about how what's happening in Iran right now is going to impact other parts of the world. And if you care to, Ambassador, for U.S. foreign policy, what does this mean for how the U.S. engages in the world, how the U.S. is seen in the world? What do you think this portends for the future?
Thank you. I believe that a great deal of it will depend on how this ends, whether our credibility maintains, that we are able to get a goal, whether it's regime change or the the 3 demands that the United States has put out, whether it's possible to achieve those, may have an impact on how our standing is. But the illegality that is widely understood of this attack, this conflict, is also going to have an impact. So I think the results of it are going to make the difference. And no one argues that Iran needs a new government, a new regime, that the people deserve better than what they've had in the last 47 years. That is not an issue.
Let's do Mona share real quick if you want to give an answer to that, and then we'll close with Bobby.
No matter how the short term look of this war is, or the public opinion ups or down of this war is, one thing that is clear to everybody, and we want to reemphasize it as the people of Iran, is that after all of these discussions, the only shining city on that hill is the United States. And whenever it is needed, it has been United States that have come to the help and rescue of the oppressed people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess looking through a legal lens for a moment, I think, there's been a lot of writing and hand-wringing over the limitations of the international legal regime, both in terms of how to address, as one of the questions raised, when there are murders of thousands within a country. And I think and there have been critiques, of course, of how the system works when there is a threat posed by Iran at some level. And so I think it does require, new thinking. I mean, if the one thing you want to say about the Trump administration, there's certainly been new thinking here. We're new. And I do think creative reimagining of how some of this system can operate to ensure that the people of Iran can live freely and in a democratic state, free of oppression, and where there can be limitations on the violence that state poses to others, but similarly can harness and limit the threats that can be posed by the United States or Israel. So there has to be brave new thinking that I think can be fostered at the City Club and at the Cleveland World Affairs Council and amongst everyone here.
Well, that's a perfect way to end tonight's session. Give you guys a round of applause. Thank you
Nicely
all
done.
for joining us at the Happy Hour. Of course, forums like this are made possible by all of you, and you can learn more about how you can engage at cityclub.org. You can also go to ccwa.org to learn more about the Cleveland Council on World Affairs. Tonight's forum, as you heard, is part of the City Club and the Community Series sponsored by Bank of America. Thank you to them. There's 2 more opportunities to join the City Club here on Wednesday, April 1st, and then finale on Wednesday, May 6th. Topics to be announced, so put those on your calendar. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm Marty Flax, and this forum is now adjourned.
Nicely done.